The emergency alarm pierced through the dawn silence at Shaw Air Force Base like a razor blade through silk. In the pre-flight briefing room, seasoned combat pilots froze as the automated voice announced what every aviator dreaded most: aircraft in distress. Strike Eagle 77 experiencing dual-engine failure and hydraulic compromise. Pilot unconscious. Weapons systems officer attempting emergency procedures. What happened next defied every protocol, challenged every assumption about combat readiness, and proved that sometimes the most unlikely person in the room is exactly who you need when everything falls apart. But to understand how Second Lieutenant Emily Parker became the pilot who would attempt the most dangerous emergency landing in Shaw's history, we need to go back 6 months earlier, to a time when nobody, absolutely nobody, believed she belonged in a fighter cockpit at all. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning mist clung to the South Carolina palmetto trees surrounding Shaw Air Force Base as Second Lieutenant Emily Parker walked across the tarmac toward the flight simulator building. It was 0530 hours, and she was already on her second cup of coffee, her worn notebook tucked under her arm like a security blanket. While other pilots were still hitting snooze buttons in their quarters, Emily had been awake for 2 hours, reviewing emergency procedures and studying aircraft system diagrams by lamplight. The F-15E Strike Eagle simulator bay hummed with electronic activity, banks of computers generating virtual combat scenarios that felt more real than reality itself. Emily slid into the familiar cockpit seat, her hands finding the controls with the muscle memory of someone who had logged more simulator hours than most pilots accumulated in actual aircraft. The technicians had nicknamed her Sim Queen, a title that stung more than they realized. "Morning, Parker," called out Technical Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, the lead simulator instructor. "Ready for another session in your office?" Emily forced a smile while running through her pre-flight checks. "Always ready, Sergeant. What's the scenario today?" "Surface-to-air missile threat over contested airspace. Multiple bogies, weather deteriorating, and your wingman has communication failures." Rodriguez paused at his control station. "Should be right up your alley. Complex systems management under pressure." The backhanded compliment landed exactly as intended. Emily's reputation as a systems expert was well established, but it came with the unspoken assumption that she was more of a computer technician than a warrior. She had graduated third in her class from pilot training, mastering every technical aspect of the F-15E Strike Eagle with obsessive precision. But she had never seen actual combat, never felt the adrenaline of live missile locks, never experienced the chaos of real battle where split-second decisions separated heroes from casualties. Her fellow pilots made sure she never forgot it. Captain Jake Morrison, callsign Viper, entered the simulator bay with his characteristic swagger. His flight suit bore the patches of 3 combat deployments, and his confidence filled the room like cologne. "Hey, Sim Queen, saving the world one computer simulation at a time?" Emily's fingers tightened around her control stick, but she kept her voice level. "Just staying sharp, sir." "Sharp for what? You planning on fighting a war against artificial intelligence?" Morrison laughed at his own joke while settling into the adjacent simulator. "Real combat isn't about memorizing emergency procedures, Parker. It's about having the instincts to react when everything you've studied goes out the window." The comment stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. Emily had indeed memorized every emergency procedure in the F-15E technical manual. She could recite system failure protocols from memory, calculate fuel consumption rates in her head, and troubleshoot electrical problems that stumped experienced maintenance crews. But she had never had the opportunity to prove herself in actual combat operations. Her assignment to Shaw Air Force Base had come with the training designation, Combat Systems Familiarization with Deployment Pending Evaluation. In military terminology, it meant she was competent enough to fly the aircraft, but not trusted enough to take it into harm's way. While pilots like Morrison rotated through combat deployments in the Middle East and Eastern Europe, Emily remained stateside, perfecting her skills in simulations and training exercises. Lieutenant Colonel Sarah Chen, the squadron's operations officer, appeared in the doorway of the simulator bay. Her presence immediately commanded attention from everyone in the room. Chen had flown combat missions in 3 different conflicts and earned a reputation for recognizing talent wherever she found it. She also had little patience for ego-driven pilots who confused loudness with competence. Parker, Chen said, her voice cutting through Morrison's continued commentary about the differences between simulation and reality. I need to see you in my office after your session. Emily felt her stomach drop. Unscheduled meetings with superior officers rarely brought good news, especially for pilots who hadn't yet proven themselves in combat. She nodded professionally while her mind raced through possible reasons for the summons. Had she made a mistake in her last training flight? Had someone complained about her simulator time usage? Was she being reassigned to a non-flying position? The simulation began with typical complexity, multiple aircraft, shifting weather patterns, and emerging threats that required constant adaptation. Emily's approach was methodical and precise, analyzing each variable before making calculated decisions. She identified the surface-to-air missile sites 3 seconds before they activated, adjusted her flight path to exploit radar shadows, and coordinated with her simulated wingman, despite the communication difficulties. Morrison, flying the parallel scenario in the adjacent simulator, took a more aggressive approach. His aircraft screamed through the virtual airspace with impressive speed and dramatic maneuvering, but Emily noticed he was burning fuel at an unsustainable rate and positioning himself within range of threats he hadn't fully analyzed. 28 minutes into the scenario, Morrison's simulation ended abruptly with a mission failure. His aggressive tactics had led him into an ambush he hadn't seen coming, resulting in a simulated aircraft loss. Emily's methodical approach, meanwhile, had successfully completed the primary mission objectives while avoiding all threats and returning with fuel to spare. "Lucky break, Sim Queen," Morrison muttered as he climbed out of his cockpit. "Real combat doesn't give you time to calculate every move." Emily didn't respond, but Technical Sergeant Rodriguez did. "Actually, Captain, Lieutenant Parker's approach demonstrated textbook threat management. In real combat, the pilots who survive are usually the ones who think before they react." The comment hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison's face darkened, but before he could respond, Lieutenant Colonel Chen reappeared in the doorway. "Parker, my office, now." Emily gathered her notebook and followed Chen through the corridors of the operations building. The walls were lined with photographs of squadron aircraft and pilots, many taken in combat zones that Emily had only seen in satellite imagery. She found herself wondering if her own photograph would ever join them, or if she would remain forever relegated to training status. Chen's office reflected her no-nonsense personality: functional furniture, operational charts, and a wall of commendations that spoke to years of distinguished service. She gestured for Emily to take a seat while she reviewed a file on her desk. "Parker, I've been watching your performance for the past 4 months. Your technical knowledge is exceptional, your systems management skills are outstanding, and your simulation scores are consistently among the highest in the squadron." Emily felt a flicker of hope, but Chen's expression remained serious. "However," Chen continued, "there's a perception among some of your colleagues that you lack the aggressive instincts necessary for combat operations. They see your methodical approach as hesitation rather than precision." The words hit harder than Emily had expected. She had worked tirelessly to master every aspect of the F-15E Strike Eagle, spending countless hours studying systems and procedures that other pilots treated as academic exercises. But in a culture that valued split-second aggression, her careful analysis was seen as weakness. "Ma'am," Emily said carefully, "I believe that understanding aircraft systems thoroughly makes me a more effective pilot, not a more cautious one. When I know exactly how my aircraft will respond to different inputs, I can push it harder and more safely than someone who relies only on instinct." Chen leaned back in her chair, studying Emily with the intensity of someone making an important decision. "That's an interesting perspective, Lieutenant, and it raises an important question. How do we determine combat readiness in peacetime? Do we measure it by aggression and bravado, or by competence and reliability?" Emily sensed this was more than a rhetorical question. Chen was testing something, probing for insight that went beyond standard military answers. "Ma'am, I think combat readiness comes from understanding your aircraft, your mission, and yourself well enough to make the right decisions under pressure. Aggression without knowledge is just recklessness with better publicity." Chen's expression shifted slightly, revealing what might have been approval. "That's a mature answer, Parker. The question is whether you'll ever have the opportunity to prove it." The meeting ended with more questions than answers. Chen dismissed Emily with instructions to continue her training regimen and a cryptic comment about upcoming opportunities for advancement. Emily left the office feeling both encouraged and frustrated. encouraged by Chen's apparent confidence in her abilities, but frustrated by the ongoing uncertainty about her future. Walking back across the base toward the simulator building, Emily encountered Captain Lisa Rodriguez, one of the few female pilots in the squadron who had successfully transitioned from training to combat operations. Rodriguez had earned her combat credentials during missions over Syria, and her opinion carried significant weight among both pilots and command staff. "How'd the meeting go?" Rodriguez asked, falling into step beside Emily. "Hard to tell. Colonel Chen seems to think I know what I'm doing, but she also mentioned the perception that I'm not aggressive enough for combat ops." Rodriguez nodded knowingly. "I went through the same thing when I was transitioning. The old-school pilots want to see you prove yourself through confrontation and risk-taking, but the smart commanders know that survival often depends on thinking rather than reacting." They paused near the flight line, where maintenance crews were preparing F-15E Strike Eagles for the afternoon training sorties. The aircraft were magnificent machines, their twin engines and advanced avionics representing decades of technological evolution designed to dominate modern battlefields. "Want some advice?" Rodriguez continued. "Stop trying to prove you belong and start proving you're indispensable. Master the system so completely that when something goes wrong, and something always goes wrong, you're the person everyone turns to for solutions." Emily looked at the Strike Eagles gleaming in the morning sun, their weapon pylons empty but their potential for destruction unmistakable. She had studied every system, memorized every procedure, and simulated every emergency scenario multiple times. But she had never tested her knowledge against the chaos and unpredictability of actual combat. "The problem," Emily said quietly, "is that opportunities to prove indispensability don't usually announce themselves in advance." Rodriguez smiled with the wisdom of someone who had learned hard lessons in difficult circumstances. "No, they don't. But when those opportunities arrive, the pilots who survive and succeed are usually the ones who are already prepared. Keep studying, Parker. Your time will come." As Emily returned to the simulator building for her afternoon session, she carried Rodriguez's words with her like a talisman. The other pilots might see her dedication to systems mastery as excessive caution, but Emily understood it as preparation for challenges that hadn't yet revealed themselves. She settled into the familiar cockpit of the simulator, her hands finding the controls with practiced ease. Today's scenario would involve electronic warfare and GPS jamming, conditions that required pilots to rely on fundamental navigation skills rather than advanced technology. It was exactly the kind of complex, systems-dependent challenge that Emily had been preparing for without knowing it. The simulation began, and Emily found herself flying through a digital battlefield where nothing worked as expected, and survival depended on understanding the deep relationships between aircraft systems that most pilots took for granted. She was in her element, turning technological challenges into tactical advantages through knowledge that others dismissed as academic. Outside the simulator, the real world continued its unpredictable course, moving toward a crisis that would test everything Emily had learned and challenge every assumption about what made a combat pilot truly ready for war. But for now, she flew through simulated battles with precision and confidence, building skills she didn't yet know she would need, preparing for a moment that would define not just her career, but her understanding of what it meant to be ready when everything went wrong. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. 3 weeks after her meeting with Lieutenant Colonel Chen, Emily found herself facing the most challenging phase of her training, yet night operations, in degraded weather conditions. The South Carolina coast was shrouded in a thick marine layer that reduced visibility to less than half a mile, and the forecast called for thunderstorms to develop throughout the evening. It was exactly the kind of flying that separated competent pilots from exceptional ones. The briefing room buzzed with nervous energy as pilots reviewed the evening's training scenarios. Captain Jake Morrison sat at the front, his usual confidence slightly tempered by respect for the challenging conditions ahead. Even veteran combat pilots approached night flying with heightened awareness. Darkness had a way of amplifying every small mistake into potentially catastrophic consequences. "Weather's looking ugly out there," announced Major David Thompson, the evening's flight leader. His call sign Striker had been earned during precision bombing missions in Afghanistan, and his reputation for safety-conscious leadership made him popular with both junior pilots and squadron commanders. "We're going to be operating at minimums for most of the night, so I want everyone's A-game." Emily studied the meteorological charts with the intensity of someone who understood that weather wasn't just an obstacle to overcome. It was a complex system of variables that could either work for you or against you, depending on how well you understood its patterns. She had spent countless hours studying atmospheric dynamics, not from any formal requirement, but because she recognized that environmental factors often determined the success or failure of military operations. "Parker," Thompson called out, drawing her attention from the weather data, "you're flying chase tonight with Morrison. Primary mission is electronic countermeasures training. Secondary objective is night navigation in GPS-denied environment." Emily felt a familiar surge of mixed emotions. Being assigned as chase pilot meant she would be supporting Morrison's training rather than conducting her own primary mission, but it also meant she would be flying an actual aircraft rather than simulators. After months of proving her competence in artificial environments, she was finally getting another opportunity to demonstrate her skills in real-world conditions. Morrison turned in his seat, his expression carrying its usual mixture of skepticism and condescension. "Try to keep up tonight, Sim Queen. Real flying is a little different from pushing buttons in a computer program." "I'll do my best, sir," Emily replied evenly, though internally she was calculating fuel consumption rates, navigation alternatives, and equipment backup procedures that Morrison hadn't even considered yet. The pre-flight inspection of her assigned F-15E Strike Eagle revealed an aircraft in perfect mechanical condition, its twin engines and advanced avionics systems ready for the challenging night ahead. Emily ran through her checklist with meticulous attention to detail, checking not just the required items but also examining backup systems and emergency equipment that other pilots often ignored. Staff Sergeant Maria Santos, the crew chief responsible for Emily's aircraft, watched the inspection with professional interest. "You always check the emergency battery backup systems," Santos observed. "Most pilots skip right over those." "Emergency systems are only useful if they work when you need them," Emily replied, testing the backup navigation equipment. "Better to know about problems on the ground than discover them at 10,000 feet. Santos nodded approvingly. "That's the kind of thinking that keeps aircrew alive. I've seen too many pilots who treat pre-flight inspections like formalities, rather than survival procedures." As Emily completed her inspection, she noticed that Morrison was already strapping into his cockpit, his pre-flight check completed in half the time she had taken. His efficiency was impressive, but Emily wondered if his speed came at the cost of thoroughness. The question would become more relevant than she expected. The night takeoff proceeded smoothly, both aircraft lifting off into the humid coastal air with their navigation lights painting streaks through the darkness. Emily settled into formation position behind Morrison, her instruments glowing softly in the darkened cockpit. The familiar weight of the aircraft around her felt reassuring. She was finally flying instead of simulating. "Chase 1, this is Strike Lead," Morrison's voice crackled through the radio. "Electronic warfare exercise commencing in 30 seconds. Prepare for GPS denial and communication jamming." Emily acknowledged the transmission while mentally reviewing the navigation procedures they would need if their electronic systems became unreliable. She had studied traditional navigation techniques as a backup skill, understanding that modern warfare often involved deliberate disruption of satellite-based systems that younger pilots took for granted. The electronic warfare simulation began with subtle degradation of their GPS signals, followed by increasing levels of radio interference. Emily watched her navigation displays flicker and fade as the jamming intensified, forcing both pilots to rely on traditional instruments and visual landmarks that were nearly invisible in the dark, clouded conditions. Morrison's flying became noticeably less precise as his advanced navigation systems failed. Without the constant stream of digital information he was accustomed to, his aircraft began wandering off course in ways that suggested he was struggling to maintain situational awareness using basic instruments alone. "Strike Lead, you're drifting south, of course," Emily transmitted, comparing her backup compass heading with the planned navigation route she had memorized before takeoff. "Negative, Chase 1. GPS shows on course," Morrison replied, though his voice carried a note of uncertainty that hadn't been there earlier. Emily double-checked her instruments, using the emergency navigation system she had tested during pre-flight. Her position calculations, based on time, speed, and compass bearing, indicated they were indeed south of their intended route, and approaching a restricted military operations area that would create problems if they entered it inadvertently. "Strike Lead, recommend turning left 15 degrees to intercept planned route. We're approaching restricted airspace R5602. Morrison's response carried more irritation than gratitude. Chase 1. Maintain radio discipline. I have the navigation under control. But Emily could see that he didn't. Morrison's aircraft continued drifting south, and his altitude was fluctuating in ways that suggested he was having difficulty maintaining stable flight without his usual electronic assistance. The weather was deteriorating as forecast, with increasing turbulence and visibility dropping toward the minimum safe levels for night operations. Emily found herself in a delicate position. As the junior pilot, she wasn't supposed to question Morrison's navigation or flying. But as the chase pilot, she had a responsibility to monitor the flight's safety and speak up if she observed dangerous conditions developing. Her technical training had prepared her to recognize the early signs of spatial disorientation and equipment problems that could quickly escalate into emergencies. Strike lead. Be advised your altitude is fluctuating plus or minus 200 feet, she transmitted, using the most diplomatic language possible while still conveying essential safety information. Chase 1. My altimeter is functioning normally, Morrison snapped back, though Emily could see his aircraft's position lights rising and falling in patterns that confirmed her observation. The situation was becoming increasingly uncomfortable. Emily had been trained to speak up when she observed safety issues, but she also understood the social dynamics that made junior pilots reluctant to challenge senior aviators. Morrison's growing irritation suggested he was interpreting her observations as criticism rather than assistance. Then the weather took a dramatic turn for the worse. The scattered thunderstorms that meteorologists had forecast began developing rapidly, their towering clouds invisible in the darkness but revealed by sudden bursts of lightning that illuminated the night sky like flashbulbs. Turbulence increased sharply, buffeting both aircraft with forces that required constant control inputs to maintain stable flight. Strike lead. Recommend immediate turn to avoid weather cell bearing 040, Emily transmitted as her radar showed a massive thunderstorm developing directly ahead of their flight path. Morrison's aircraft continued straight ahead, either because he hadn't received the transmission through the electronic jamming or because he was too focused on basic flight control to process navigation information effectively. Emily could see the lightning flashes growing brighter ahead of them, indicating they were flying directly toward the storm's core. Strike lead. Urgent weather avoidance required, she transmitted again, this time using the priority language that demanded immediate attention. Still no response. Morrison's aircraft was now flying erratically, its navigation lights describing unstable patterns that suggested he was fighting to maintain control in the increasing turbulence. Emily realized that the combination of equipment failures, challenging weather, and spatial disorientation was creating exactly the kind of cascade failure scenario that she had studied extensively in emergency procedures training. She made a decision that would define the rest of the flight. Breaking formation protocol, Emily accelerated her aircraft to pull alongside Morrison, using her navigation lights and hand signals to get his attention. When she was close enough to see into his cockpit, she could observe that he was indeed struggling with basic flight control, his attention completely absorbed by the task of keeping his aircraft stable in the deteriorating conditions. Using standard visual signals, Emily indicated the storm ahead and pointed toward the alternate course that would take them around the weather. Morrison's response showed he had finally recognized the danger. He nodded acknowledgement and began turning left to avoid the thunderstorm, following Emily's lead as she guided both aircraft toward clearer airspace. The next 20 minutes tested every aspect of Emily's training as she essentially became the flight leader despite her junior status. Using backup navigation systems, traditional plotting techniques, and weather radar interpretation skills that Morrison apparently lacked, she guided both aircraft through the complex airspace while avoiding multiple weather hazards and maintaining safe separation from other air traffic. When they finally landed back at Shaw Air Force Base, Morrison's demeanor had changed completely. Gone was the condescending attitude and casual dismissal of Emily's capabilities. As they completed their post-flight debriefing, he spoke with the subdued tone of someone who had experienced a professional awakening. "Parker," he said quietly as they walked back from the aircraft, "I need to thank you for tonight. When everything started going wrong up there, you kept us both safe." Emily felt a complex mixture of satisfaction and discomfort. She had proven her competence in challenging conditions, but she hadn't intended to embarrass Morrison or highlight his shortcomings. Her goal had been mission success and flight safety, not personal vindication. We're a team, sir. I was just doing my job as chase pilot. Morrison shook his head. You were doing a lot more than that. I've been flying for 8 years, including 3 combat deployments, and tonight I learned something I should have figured out a long time ago. He paused at the entrance to the operations building, his expression thoughtful in the harsh, fluorescent lighting. What's that? Emily asked. That knowing how to use your equipment when it works is different from knowing how to fly when it doesn't. Tonight, when all my fancy electronics failed and the weather went to hell, you were the one who had the skills we needed. The compliment carried more weight because it came from someone who had previously questioned her qualifications. Emily realized that she had just passed a test she hadn't known she was taking. Not a formal evaluation, but a real-world demonstration of competence under pressure that no simulation could replicate. Major Thompson appeared in the debriefing room as they completed their post-flight paperwork. His expression suggested he had been monitoring their flight progress and was aware of the challenges they had encountered. Interesting night out there, he commented, reviewing their flight logs. Morrison, your debrief mentions equipment failures and weather avoidance. Want to walk me through what happened? Morrison glanced at Emily before responding. Sir. When our electronic systems degraded and the weather deteriorated, Lieutenant Parker demonstrated exceptional situational awareness and navigation skills. She essentially guided the flight through conditions that I found challenging. Thompson's eyebrows rose slightly. Morrison's admission that a junior pilot had essentially taken charge of the flight was unusual, particularly coming from someone known for his confidence and independence. Parker, what's your assessment of the evening's operations? Thompson asked. Emily chose her words carefully. Sir, the flight proceeded according to plan until equipment degradation and weather changes created a more complex environment than we had briefed. Both aircraft returned safely, and all training objectives were accomplished. Thompson studied both pilots for a moment, his expression suggesting he understood more about the evening's events than their formal reports revealed. Parker, I want to see you in my office tomorrow morning at 0800 Morrison. Good work adapting to challenging conditions. As they left the debriefing room, Emily wondered what tomorrow's meeting would bring. She had demonstrated her competence under pressure, but she had also highlighted another pilot's limitations in ways that might create professional complications. The balance between team loyalty and flight safety was more complex than any textbook had prepared her for. Walking across the darkened base toward her quarters, Emily reflected on the night's events. For the first time since arriving at Shaw, she had been the pilot that others depended on, rather than the one seeking validation. It felt different from simulation success, more consequential, more real, and infinitely more satisfying. The humid South Carolina air carried the smell of approaching rain, and lightning flickered in the distance where more thunderstorms were building. Emily looked up at the clouds and realized that she was no longer afraid of challenging conditions. She was prepared for them. The morning sun cast long shadows across Shaw Air Force Base as Emily approached Major Thompson's office, her mind still processing the events of the previous night. The humid South Carolina air carried the familiar sounds of military aviation, jet engines spooling up for morning sorties, ground crews conducting pre-flight inspections, and the distant chatter of air traffic control coordinating departures. Emily had spent the sleepless hours before dawn replaying every decision from the night flight, analyzing her actions with the same methodical precision she applied to aircraft systems. She had broken protocol by essentially assuming flight leadership, but she had also prevented what could have been a serious incident. The question weighing on her mind was whether Thompson's morning summons represented recognition or reprimand. The operations building buzzed with typical pre-duty activity as pilots reviewed weather briefings and maintenance crews reported aircraft status. Emily noticed several conversations pause as she passed, suggesting word of the previous night's flight had already circulated through the squadron's informal communication network. In military aviation, news of unusual incidents spread faster than official reports. Thompson's office door was open, revealing the major reviewing flight records at his desk. His expression was unreadable as he gestured for Emily to enter and take a seat. The walls displayed the usual collection of military certificates and photographs, but Emily's attention was drawn to a framed picture of an F-15E Strike Eagle in flight, its sleek profile captured against a backdrop of desert terrain that suggested combat operations in the Middle East. "Close the door, Parker," Thompson said without looking up from his paperwork. "We need to discuss last night's flight and what it means for your future here." Emily felt her pulse quicken as she settled into the chair across from Thompson's desk. The Major's tone was neutral, offering no hint about the direction their conversation would take. She had learned to read the subtle indicators that preceded significant career announcements, and Thompson's careful demeanor suggested this meeting would be more consequential than routine feedback. "Sir, regarding the flight operations last night." Thompson held up a hand, interrupting her prepared explanation. "Before you start justifying your actions, let me ask you a question. When Morrison's navigation systems failed, and he began drifting off course, what was your first instinct?" The question caught Emily off guard. She had expected to discuss protocol violations or chain of command issues, not her psychological responses to emergency situations. "Sir, my first thought was that we needed to get back on course before entering restricted airspace." "That's your analytical response," Thompson said, finally making eye contact. "What was your instinct? The immediate reaction before you started calculating solutions?" Emily considered the question carefully. Thompson wasn't asking for a technical assessment. He wanted to understand her fundamental approach to crisis management under pressure. "My instinct was to help," she admitted. "I saw a fellow pilot struggling with a dangerous situation, and I wanted to assist however possible." Thompson leaned back in his chair, his expression shifting to something that might have been satisfaction. "That's the answer I was hoping for. Not ego, not competition, not protocol, just the fundamental desire to help a fellow aviator in trouble." The comment surprised Emily. She had expected criticism for exceeding her authority as chase pilot, not praise for her motivations. Thompson's perspective suggested he viewed the incident through a different lens than she had anticipated. "Parker, I've been reviewing your training records and performance evaluations. Your technical knowledge is exceptional, your systems expertise is unmatched in the squadron, and your simulation scores consistently rank in the top percentile. But until last night, there was one critical question that remained unanswered." Thompson paused, studying Emily with the intensity of someone making an important assessment. The question was whether you could apply that knowledge effectively under pressure in real-world conditions. Last night, you answered it definitively. Emily felt a surge of cautious optimism, but she sensed that Thompson's evaluation was leading towards something more significant than routine commendation. His careful choice of words suggested he was building toward an announcement that would affect her career trajectory. "Sir, I appreciate the positive feedback, but I'm aware that I exceeded my authority as chase pilot. Morrison was the designated flight leader, and I should have—" "You should have done exactly what you did," Thompson interrupted. "When equipment failures and weather conditions created a dangerous situation, you took appropriate action to ensure flight safety. That's not insubordination. That's good judgment under pressure." Thompson opened a file folder on his desk, revealing documents that Emily recognized as deployment orders and personnel assignments. Her heart rate increased as she realized the conversation was moving beyond performance evaluation toward operational assignments. "Parker, I'm recommending you for advancement to combat-ready status, effective immediately. You've demonstrated the technical competence and decision-making ability necessary for operational deployments." The words hit Emily like a physical force. After months of training status and professional uncertainty, she was finally being recognized as a fully qualified combat pilot. The validation she had worked toward for so long was suddenly within reach, bringing both elation and apprehension about the challenges that lay ahead. "Sir, I'm honored by the recommendation, but I should mention that I still haven't completed the advanced weapon systems training that most pilots receive before their first deployment." Thompson smiled for the first time during their conversation. "Parker, you've been studying advanced weapon systems on your own time for the past 6 months. Your knowledge of electronic countermeasures and precision guidance systems exceeds that of pilots with multiple combat deployments. The only thing you've been missing is practical application." Emily realized that her obsessive study habits, which some colleagues had viewed as excessive caution, had actually prepared her more thoroughly than the standard training curriculum. Her methodical approach to learning had created expertise that formal programs might have missed. "There's one more thing," Thompson continued, his expression becoming more serious. "Lieutenant Colonel Chen has specifically requested you for a special assignment that's developing. I can't provide details until security clearances are processed, but it involves advanced systems integration in challenging operational environments." The mention of Chen's involvement added another layer of significance to the conversation. Emily had sensed during their previous meeting that Chen was evaluating her for something beyond routine squadron assignments, and now those suspicions appeared confirmed. "Sir, when would this assignment begin?" "Potentially within the next 2 weeks, depending on how quickly certain international situations develop. Chen will brief you on specifics once clearances are confirmed, but I wanted you to know that your performance last night directly influenced the selection decision." Emily felt the weight of opportunity and responsibility settling on her shoulders. The combat readiness designation she had worked toward for months was arriving alongside assignment to operations that sounded more complex than standard deployment rotations. A knock on Thompson's office door interrupted their conversation. Staff Sergeant Santos appeared in the doorway, her expression carrying the urgency that typically accompanied maintenance emergencies or operational changes. "Sir, Lieutenant Colonel Chen requests immediate conference with you and Lieutenant Parker, Priority Alpha." Thompson's demeanor shifted instantly to full operational alertness. Priority Alpha communications indicated time-sensitive situations that could affect flight operations or personnel safety. Emily felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the transition from routine career discussion to potential emergency response. "Santos, where is Colonel Chen?" "Squadron Operations Center, sir. She mentioned something about monitoring an international situation that might require immediate pilot availability." Thompson stood, gathering his papers with practiced efficiency. "Parker, it looks like your combat readiness designation might be tested sooner than expected. Let's go see what Chen needs." They walked quickly through the corridors toward the operations center, passing windows that offered views of the flight line, where maintenance crews were preparing aircraft for what appeared to be accelerated departure schedules. Emily noticed unusual activity levels that suggested the base was responding to developing situations beyond routine training operations. The operations center hummed with electronic activity as communications specialists monitored international frequencies and intelligence personnel analyzed satellite imagery on large display screens. Lieutenant Colonel Chen stood at the central command station, her attention focused on reports that were being updated in real time. "Thompson, Parker," Chen acknowledged without turning from the displays. "We have a developing situation in Eastern Europe that may require rapid deployment of specialized capabilities. Parker, your systems expertise and technical knowledge may be needed for operations involving advanced electronic warfare environments." Emily felt her stomach tighten with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The abstract concept of combat deployment was suddenly becoming immediate reality, complete with specific operational requirements and time pressures that left little room for gradual adjustment. "Ma'am," Emily said carefully, "I'm ready for whatever assignment the squadron requires." Chen turned to face them, her expression carrying the intensity of someone managing multiple critical priorities simultaneously. "Parker, the question isn't whether you're ready, it's whether you're prepared for operations where there's no simulation backup and no opportunity for do-overs." The challenge in Chen's words was unmistakable. Emily realized she was being presented with the ultimate test of everything she had learned, studied, and practiced during her months of preparation. The moment she had unconsciously been preparing for was arriving with a speed that left no time for second thoughts. "Ma'am, I believe my training has prepared me for operational challenges. I'm ready to prove it." Chen studied Emily for a long moment, her evaluation encompassing not just technical qualifications, but the intangible qualities that determine success or failure in high-pressure situations. Emily could feel the weight of assessment, knowing that her response would influence decisions affecting both her career and mission success. "Very well," Chen said finally. "Parker, you're being assigned to Special Operations Standby status, effective immediately. Report to the secure briefing facility at 1,400 hours for mission-specific preparations. Thompson, I need her combat certification expedited through all remaining administrative requirements." Emily felt the ground shift beneath her feet as months of preparation crystallized into immediate operational reality. The combat readiness she had worked toward was no longer a future goal. It was a present requirement for missions that would test every aspect of her training. As they left the operations center, Thompson placed a hand on Emily's shoulder with the gesture of a mentor, offering final guidance before a critical test. "Parker, remember what you proved last night. When complex situations develop and systems fail, you have the knowledge and judgment to find solutions. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and remember that the best pilots are the ones who think clearly under pressure." Emily nodded, her mind already shifting from the anxieties of career advancement to the challenges of operational preparation. The journey from simulation expertise to combat readiness was accelerating beyond her control, carrying her toward tests that would define not just her military career, but her understanding of her own capabilities under the ultimate pressure. The afternoon briefing would reveal the specific nature of her assignment, but Emily already understood that she was crossing a threshold from which there would be no return. The pilot who emerged from whatever challenges lay ahead would be fundamentally different from the one who had spent months proving herself in simulators and training exercises. She was about to discover what she was truly capable of when everything depended on getting it right the first time. The secure briefing facility at Shaw Air Force Base existed in a world apart from the normal operations of military aviation. Located 3 levels below ground and accessible only through multiple security checkpoints, the facility housed intelligence operations that most base personnel never knew existed. Emily had never been inside the classified areas, and the weight of her temporary security badge felt heavier than the responsibility it represented. Colonel Patricia Hayes, the base intelligence director, stood at the front of the windowless briefing room, studying satellite imagery that shifted and updated in real time. Her career had spanned 3 decades of international crisis management, and her reputation for calm analysis under pressure made her one of the most respected intelligence officers in the Air Force. When Hayes requested pilots for special operations, commanders listened. "Lieutenant Parker," Hayes said without turning from the displays, "your timing is either exceptionally good or remarkably unfortunate, depending on your perspective." Emily took her assigned seat among the handful of other personnel in the room, all senior officers with security clearances that allowed access to information she was only now being briefed to receive. The atmosphere carried the tension that preceded significant military operations, with the kind of focused intensity that meant lives and international stability were at stake. Lieutenant Colonel Chen entered the briefing room carrying classified folders and secure communication devices. Her expression was grim as she reviewed the latest intelligence updates with Hayes, their whispered conversation punctuated by pointing at specific locations on the digital maps that covered one entire wall of the facility. "Ladies and gentlemen," Hayes announced, calling the briefing to order, "the situation we're monitoring in Eastern Europe has escalated beyond diplomatic resolution. 3 hours ago, hostile forces began jamming NATO communication satellites and GPS navigation systems across a 200-mile radius, effectively blinding our conventional reconnaissance capabilities in a strategically critical region." Emily felt her pulse quicken as she recognized the operational challenge being described. Electronic warfare on that scale represented a sophisticated threat that could cripple modern military operations dependent on satellite-based systems. The implications extended far beyond regional conflicts to global security interests. "The jamming technology being employed is more advanced than our intelligence estimates predicted," Hayes continued, activating a 3-dimensional display that showed the affected region in detail. "Standard reconnaissance aircraft are unable to operate effectively in the compromised electromagnetic environment. We need specialized capabilities that can function when conventional systems fail." Chen stepped forward, her attention focused directly on Emily. "This is where your particular expertise becomes relevant, Parker. The F-15E Strike Eagle has backup navigation and communication systems that most pilots never learn to use effectively. You've mastered those systems because you've studied every aspect of the aircraft's capabilities." The connection between Emily's obsessive technical study and the current crisis became clear. While other pilots had focused on learning the F-15E's primary systems, Emily had explored the redundant and emergency capabilities that were designed for exactly the kind of electronic warfare environment now developing in Eastern Europe. "Ma'am," Emily said carefully, "are you suggesting a reconnaissance mission in denied airspace?" Hayes and Chen exchanged glances before Hayes responded. "We're suggesting a mission that requires a pilot who can navigate, communicate, and gather intelligence when all the normal tools for doing so have been rendered inoperative. The question is whether you're prepared for that level of responsibility." Emily felt the weight of the moment settling around her. The theoretical knowledge she had acquired through months of study was about to be tested in operational conditions where failure could have international consequences. There would be no simulation reset, no second chances, no opportunity to consult technical manuals when critical decisions needed to be made. "I'm prepared, ma'am." Chen activated another display showing detailed mission parameters. "The operation involves a single F-15E, penetrating the jammed zone to establish the scope and source of the electronic interference. You would be flying solo, using only backup navigation systems and emergency communication protocols. The flight profile requires low-altitude penetration to avoid detection, followed by high-altitude intelligence gathering using sensors that can operate independently of satellite systems. Emily studied the mission profile, her mind automatically calculating fuel requirements, threat assessments, and emergency procedures. The complexity was substantial, but it fell within the operational parameters she had memorized from technical manuals that other pilots considered academic exercises. "What's the timeline for mission execution?" she asked. "Wheels up at 04:00 tomorrow," Hayes replied. "That gives you 18 hours to complete specialized briefings, review classified intelligence, and conduct final aircraft preparations. The operational window is narrow. Intelligence indicates the hostile jamming systems are mobile and may relocate within 48 hours. The compressed timeline meant Emily would be transitioning from training status to solo combat operations with minimal preparation time. She realized that her months of simulation training and systems study had been unknowing preparation for exactly this kind of rapid deployment scenario. Captain Morrison appeared in the doorway of the briefing room, his expression showing surprise at finding Emily among the personnel being briefed for classified operations. Chen gestured for him to join the group, though her attention remained focused on the mission parameters being displayed. "Morrison, you'll be flying backup support," Chen announced. "Your primary role is to maintain communication with Parker during the intelligence gathering phase and provide assistance if she encounters difficulties during extraction." Emily noticed Morrison's reaction to being assigned as her support rather than mission leader. His expression showed the professional adjustment required when established hierarchies shifted due to specialized mission requirements. She realized this represented another test of her ability to function as primary pilot in high-stakes operations. "Ma'am," Morrison said, "I'm prepared to support whatever mission requirements exist. What are the specific threat assessments for hostile air defenses in the target area?" Hayes activated a new display showing enemy air defense positions and capabilities. Intelligence indicates surface-to-air missile systems with radar guidance that may be less effective against low-altitude penetration. However, the mobile nature of these threats means real-time threat assessment will be critical for mission success. Emily studied the defensive patterns, recognizing systems she had encountered in advanced simulations but never faced in actual operations. The theoretical knowledge was comprehensive, but the psychological pressure of knowing that radar locks and missile launches would be real rather than simulated added a dimension that no training could fully prepare her for. "Parker," Chen said, drawing her attention from the threat displays, "I need to know if you have any concerns about executing this mission. The operational requirements exceed normal deployment protocols, and there's no dishonor in requesting additional preparation time." The question forced Emily to confront the gap between her technical knowledge and her operational experience. She possessed the skills necessary for the mission, but she had never tested them under the life-or-death pressure of actual combat operations. The honest answer was that she had concerns about every aspect of the mission, but she also recognized that her preparation had been focused on exactly these kinds of challenges. "Ma'am, I have concerns about any mission this complex, but I believe my training has prepared me for the technical and tactical requirements. I'm ready to execute as briefed." Chen studied Emily for a long moment before nodding approval. "That's the kind of honest confidence I need to hear. Overconfidence gets pilots killed, but excessive caution prevents mission success. You found the right balance." The briefing continued for another 2 hours, covering intelligence assessments, communication protocols, and emergency procedures that Emily had studied theoretically but would now need to execute under operational pressure. Each detail added to the complexity of a mission that would test every aspect of her training and preparation. As the formal briefing concluded, Hayes approached Emily with a folder containing additional classified materials. "Parker, these are backup procedures for scenarios we hope you won't encounter but need to be prepared for. Study them tonight, but remember that successful missions usually depend more on fundamental flying skills than exotic contingency plans." Emily accepted the materials, understanding that she was receiving information that could save her life if standard procedures failed. The weight of the folder felt proportional to the responsibility she was accepting by agreeing to execute the mission. Morrison waited for her as she left the briefing facility, his expression showing a mixture of professional respect and personal concern. "Parker, I wanted to tell you that I'll be monitoring every aspect of your flight tomorrow. If you encounter any difficulties, I'll be ready to assist however possible." The offer carried genuine sincerity that represented a significant evolution from Morrison's earlier skepticism about her capabilities. Emily realized that her performance during the night training flight had fundamentally changed his assessment of her qualifications as a combat pilot. "Thank you, sir. I appreciate knowing you'll be there if I need backup support." As Emily walked back to her quarters carrying the classified mission materials, she felt the weight of transition from months of preparation to hours before execution. The technical knowledge she had accumulated through obsessive study was about to be tested in operational conditions where academic understanding would either prove sufficient or reveal fatal limitations. The humid South Carolina evening carried the sounds of normal base operations, aircraft returning from training sorties, maintenance crews preparing for night shifts, and the distant activity of a military installation continuing its routine functions. But for Emily, nothing felt routine anymore. She was 18 hours away from her first solo combat mission, flying into electromagnetic warfare conditions that would test capabilities she had studied but never used operationally. The pilot who returned from tomorrow's mission would have answers to questions about her own competence that months of simulation training had been unable to provide. Tonight, she would study classified procedures and prepare equipment for a mission that represented everything she had worked toward since arriving at Shaw Air Force Base. Tomorrow, she would discover whether her preparation had been sufficient for the ultimate test of military aviation, executing a critical mission when failure was not an option. At 0330 hours, Shaw Air Force Base existed in that peculiar stillness that preceded dawn military operations. The air was thick with coastal humidity and the electric tension that accompanied high-stakes missions. Emily walked across the darkened tarmac toward her assigned F-15E Strike Eagle. Her flight gear weighted with emergency equipment and classified communication devices that most pilots never carried. The aircraft waiting for her was tail number 910304, a Strike Eagle with over 3,000 flight hours and a maintenance record that reflected meticulous care by ground crews who understood their work kept pilots alive. Staff Sergeant Santos had personally supervised the pre-flight preparations, ensuring every backup system Emily might need was functioning perfectly. "She's ready for whatever you're going to ask of her," Santos said, handing Emily the final maintenance forms. "I've tested all the emergency navigation equipment twice, and the backup communication systems are operating at peak efficiency. The bird knows what's expected of her today." Emily accepted the paperwork while studying her aircraft in the pre-dawn darkness. The Strike Eagle looked different somehow, more purposeful, more serious than the training aircraft she had flown countless times before. Perhaps it was her own psychological state, but the machine seemed to embody the gravity of the mission ahead. "Sergeant, I want to personally check the emergency battery backup systems one more time. If my primary electrical systems fail in the electronic warfare environment, those batteries might be the only thing keeping essential instruments operational." Santos nodded approvingly. Most pilots don't even know where those battery switches are located, let alone how to manage power distribution during electrical failures. "You're thinking like someone who expects to bring this aircraft home safely." The observation carried more weight than Santos realized. Emily's methodical approach to emergency procedures reflected her understanding that today's mission would push both aircraft and pilot beyond normal operational parameters. Every backup system, every redundant capability, every emergency procedure might prove critical for mission success and survival. Captain Morrison appeared on the flight line carrying his own mission equipment, his usual confident demeanor tempered by awareness of the operation's complexity. His role as backup support required him to monitor Emily's progress while remaining outside the electronic warfare zone that would compromise his aircraft's conventional systems. "How are you feeling about today?" Morrison asked as they conducted parallel pre-flight inspections of their aircraft. Emily paused in her equipment checks, considering the question honestly. "Nervous about executing everything perfectly, but confident in my preparation. The systems I've been studying for months are finally going to prove their worth." "That's the right attitude," Morrison replied. "Trust your training, trust your aircraft, and remember that intelligence-gathering missions succeed through precision, not heroics. Get in, collect the information, and get out safely." Lieutenant Colonel Chen arrived on the flight line, accompanied by Colonel Hayes, both officers carrying secure communication equipment that would allow them to monitor the mission's progress from the command center. Their presence underscored the operation's importance and the high-level attention focused on Emily's first combat assignment. "Parker," Chen said, approaching Emily's aircraft, "final intelligence updates show the electronic jamming has intensified overnight. You'll be flying into an electromagnetic environment more hostile than our initial assessments predicted. Are you prepared for complete satellite navigation failure?" The question addressed Emily's greatest area of expertise, operating aircraft systems when modern technology failed. "Ma'am, I've practiced traditional navigation using compass headings, time-speed calculations, and visual landmarks. The backup systems can maintain basic flight operations even with total GPS denial." Hayes activated a handheld device that displayed real-time intelligence updates. "Hostile air defense activity has increased along your planned route. Intelligence suggests they're using mobile radar systems that may be more difficult to avoid than stationary installations. Your low-altitude approach should minimize detection, but situational awareness will be critical." Emily studied the updated threat information while mentally rehearsing her planned flight profile. The mission required her to penetrate denied airspace at minimum altitude to avoid radar detection, then climb to intelligence-gathering altitude while avoiding surface-to-air missile threats that could appear anywhere along her route. "Ma'am, I understand the risks. The mission profile allows for route adjustments based on real-time threat assessment, and I am prepared to adapt as conditions require." Chen checked her watch as ground crews completed final preparations on both aircraft. "Time to execute, Parker. Remember that this mission's success depends on intelligence collection, not engagement with hostile forces. Avoid confrontation whenever possible and prioritize safe extraction with the information we need." Emily strapped into her cockpit as the eastern horizon began showing the first hints of dawn. The familiar ritual of startup procedures felt different today. Each switch activation, each system check, each radio call carried the weight of operational reality rather than training exercise. This was her transition from simulation to combat, from theoretical knowledge to practical application under conditions where mistakes had consequences beyond failed grades or instructor criticism. The F-15E's twin engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, the sound carrying across the base like an announcement of serious intent. Emily ran through her final checks while monitoring radio communications that confirmed Morrison's aircraft was also ready for departure. In minutes, she would be flying solo into hostile territory, relying on skills she had studied but never tested under actual combat pressure. "Strike 77, you are cleared for takeoff," came the tower controller's voice, using the call sign that would identify Emily throughout the mission. "Winds calm, visibility unlimited, ceiling 10,000 broken. Good hunting." Emily acknowledged the clearance while advancing her throttles, feeling the Strike Eagle respond with the smooth acceleration that had made the aircraft legendary among combat pilots. As her aircraft lifted off from Shaw's runway and climbed into the pre-dawn darkness, she experienced the psychological transition from preparation to execution that marked every pilot's first combat mission. Morrison's voice crackled through her headset as both aircraft established their initial formation. 7-7, this is your backup. I'll be monitoring from the edge of the electronic warfare zone and ready to assist if you encounter difficulties during extraction. Copy, backup. Proceeding as briefed, Emily replied, though her attention was already shifting to the navigation challenges ahead. Within 30 minutes, she would be flying beyond the range of conventional communication and navigation systems, dependent entirely on the backup capabilities she had mastered through months of intensive study. The flight toward the electronic warfare zone passed quickly, with Emily monitoring her instruments while mentally rehearsing the procedures she would need when her primary systems failed. The night sky was clear, with stars visible through her canopy providing the celestial references that traditional navigation required when satellite systems became unreliable. 7-7, you're approaching the edge of confirmed GPS denial, Morrison's voice warned. From this point forward, you'll be on your own until mission completion. Emily felt her primary navigation displays begin flickering as hostile jamming systems interfered with satellite signals. Within minutes, the advanced positioning systems that modern pilots took for granted had become completely unreliable. She was now flying by compass heading and time calculations, using techniques that predated the electronic age but remained effective when sophisticated technology failed. Backup 77 is entering denied airspace, switching to emergency communication protocols. See you on the other side. The radio went silent as jamming systems overwhelmed her conventional communication equipment. Emily was now alone in her cockpit, flying through increasingly hostile electromagnetic environment toward intelligence targets that could provide critical information about enemy capabilities. Every decision from this point forward would be hers alone, with no opportunity for consultation or assistance from command authority. She descended to minimum safe altitude as her flight plan required, using terrain features and pre-planned landmarks to maintain navigation accuracy. The landscape below was still shrouded in pre-dawn darkness, but Emily had memorized the geographic features that would guide her through denied territory to her intelligence-gathering objectives. Her aircraft's radar warning receiver suddenly activated, indicating that hostile tracking systems had detected her presence despite her low-altitude approach. The electronic tone that filled her headset meant that somewhere below, enemy air defense operators were attempting to establish a weapons-quality lock on her aircraft. Emily's pulse quickened as she realized the mission had transitioned from intelligence gathering to active evasion of hostile forces. The theoretical knowledge she had accumulated through months of study was about to be tested under the ultimate pressure. Enemy missile systems were tracking her aircraft, and her survival depended on executing evasion techniques she had only practiced in simulation. The electronic warfare environment was more intense than intelligence estimates had predicted, and the hostile response was more aggressive than mission planners had anticipated. Emily found herself flying solo through a gauntlet of threats that were testing every aspect of her training, preparation, and natural ability to think clearly under pressure. But this was only the beginning of challenges that would ultimately require her to attempt the most dangerous emergency landing in Shaw Air Force Base history. The mission that had started as intelligence gathering was about to become a test of survival that no amount of simulation training could have fully prepared her for. As her radar warning receiver continued its ominous tone, Emily pressed deeper into hostile territory, carrying classified sensors toward targets that held answers to questions affecting international security. Behind her, the familiar safety of Shaw Air Force Base grew more distant with each passing mile. The radar warning receiver's insistent tone filled Emily's cockpit like a death knell as she maneuvered through the valleys of Eastern European terrain, her Strike Eagle skimming barely 200 feet above the ground. The pre-dawn landscape rushed past in shadowy blurs, abandoned farmhouses, dense forests, and the occasional glint of water that helped confirm her position using the traditional navigation techniques that had become her lifeline. 3 surface-to-air missile sites had already painted her aircraft with targeting radars, forcing Emily to execute violent evasive maneuvers that pushed both pilot and machine to their operational limits. Each successful evasion brought temporary relief, but the electronic warfare environment was growing more sophisticated with every mile she penetrated into hostile territory. Her primary mission remained intelligence gathering, photographing and electronically mapping the mobile jamming systems that had blinded NATO reconnaissance satellites. But staying alive long enough to complete that mission was proving more challenging than mission planners had anticipated. The enemy's defensive network was both more extensive and more technically advanced than intelligence estimates had suggested. Emily's backup navigation system indicated she was approaching the primary target area, a valley where satellite imagery had detected unusual electronic signatures consistent with advanced jamming equipment. She began a careful climb to photography altitude, balancing the need for clear sensor data against the increased exposure to air defense systems that higher altitude would bring. At 8,000 feet, her aircraft's electronic sensors began detecting the electromagnetic signatures they had been sent to analyze. The jamming equipment below was indeed more sophisticated than anything NATO had previously encountered. Multiple mobile transmitters coordinating their interference patterns to create an electronic dead zone that could cripple modern military operations across hundreds of square miles. Emily activated her classified recording equipment, gathering intelligence data that would help military planners develop countermeasures against the new threat. The information flowing into her aircraft's memory banks represented weeks of analysis work for intelligence specialists, but collecting it required her to maintain steady flight through increasingly dangerous airspace. A new tone joined the radar warning receiver's chorus, the distinctive sound that indicated a surface-to-air missile had launched and was tracking her aircraft. Emily's training kicked in automatically, executing defensive maneuvers while dispensing chaff and flares designed to confuse incoming missiles. The Strike Eagle banked sharply left, then dove toward the terrain as Emily sought to break the missile's tracking. The first missile passed close enough that she could see its exhaust trail through her canopy, but her evasion had been successful. However, the launch had revealed her position to additional air defense sites, and her radar warning receiver now indicated multiple new threats were attempting to establish tracking locks on her aircraft. Mail lows. Emily realized the intelligence-gathering phase of her mission was complete. She had collected the sensor data required, and continuing to orbit the target area would inevitably result in a successful missile engagement. It was time to execute the extraction phase and return to friendly airspace with the critical intelligence. But as she turned toward her planned egress route, a catastrophic failure struck without warning. The Strike Eagle's left engine exploded in a burst of flame and metal fragments that sent shockwaves through the entire aircraft. Warning lights flooded Emily's cockpit as multiple systems failed simultaneously: hydraulic pressure, electrical generation, flight control responsiveness, and fuel flow, all degrading rapidly from the engine failure's cascading effects. Emily's aircraft, which moments before had been a sophisticated fighting machine, was suddenly a barely controllable collection of damaged systems fighting gravity and physics for survival. The right engine was still functioning, but at reduced power due to debris ingestion from the left engine's failure. Her backup electrical systems automatically activated, providing minimal power to essential instruments. This was the moment every combat pilot trained for but hoped never to experience: catastrophic aircraft damage while deep in hostile territory, with limited options for survival, and no possibility of immediate rescue if ejection became necessary. Emily's hands moved instinctively through emergency procedures she had memorized, but never executed under such extreme conditions. Engine fire suppression, electrical load shedding, flight control reconfiguration. Each action performed while maintaining aircraft control and assessing the extent of damage that threatened to make continued flight impossible. The engine fire warning light extinguished after she activated the suppression system, but the left engine was completely destroyed. Flying on a single engine while managing multiple system failures would have been challenging under training conditions. Attempting it while hostile missile sites continued tracking her aircraft pushed the scenario beyond the boundaries of normal emergency procedures. Her radar warning receiver maintained its ominous tone as enemy air defenses attempted to capitalize on her obvious distress. Several more missile launches were detected, forcing Emily to continue evasive maneuvering despite her aircraft's degraded condition. Each defensive maneuver stressed her damaged systems and consumed precious fuel from tanks that might be leaking from engine explosion damage. Emily established contact with her backup systems, determining that she had approximately 40 minutes of fuel remaining, enough to reach friendly airspace if she could maintain efficient flight profiles and avoid further combat maneuvering. But her aircraft's damaged condition made normal flight impossible, requiring constant control inputs to prevent departure from controlled flight. The realization struck her with crystal clarity. She was flying a critically damaged fighter aircraft through hostile airspace, using backup systems and emergency procedures that she had studied obsessively but never tested under such extreme conditions. Everything she had learned during months of preparation was being compressed into the next 30 minutes of flight time that would determine her survival. Emily began calculating fuel consumption rates while monitoring engine parameters that indicated her remaining engine was operating beyond normal limits. The mathematics were unforgiving. She had just enough fuel to reach friendly territory if everything went perfectly, with no margin for error or additional combat maneuvering. Her emergency radio crackled to life as she cleared the primary electronic warfare zone, allowing limited communication with Morrison, who had been monitoring from safe airspace outside the jamming perimeter. 7-7, this is backup. Your aircraft appears to be trailing smoke. What's your status? Emily keyed her emergency transmitter, broadcasting on frequencies that would be monitored by rescue coordination centers. Backup 7-7 has sustained major aircraft damage. Left engine destroyed, multiple system failures, fuel state critical. Attempting return to base on single engine. Hayul. Morrison's response carried the tension of someone watching a fellow pilot fight for survival. 7-7, rescue assets are being scrambled, but you're still too deep in hostile territory for immediate assistance. Can you maintain controlled flight for extraction? Emily assessed her aircraft's condition while executing another course correction to avoid terrain features that could prove fatal if her damaged flight controls failed completely. The Strike Eagle was flying, but barely. Each control input required careful calculation to prevent overstressing systems that were already operating beyond their design limits. Backup. Aircraft is controllable but degrading. I'm going to attempt extraction on current flight path. Estimated arrival Shaw Air Force Base in 28 minutes if fuel holds out. The next phase of Emily's emergency would test every aspect of her training as she attempted to fly a critically damaged aircraft across 150 miles of terrain that offered few options for emergency landing. Her obsessive study of backup systems and emergency procedures was about to face the ultimate examination. Could theoretical knowledge translate into practical survival when everything depended on getting it exactly right? Behind her, the intelligence she had gathered would prove invaluable for NATO operations planning, but that mission success would be meaningless if she couldn't survive the flight home. Emily Parker, who had never flown in combat before today, was now fighting to bring home both critical intelligence and herself using skills that months of simulation training had prepared her for but couldn't fully test. The damaged Strike Eagle limped through hostile airspace toward friendly territory, its pilot drawing on every lesson learned, every procedure memorized, and every backup system mastered during her preparation for a moment she had hoped would never come. 28 minutes to Shaw Air Force Base. 28 minutes to prove that knowledge, preparation, and calm thinking under pressure could overcome even the most desperate circumstances. The hardest part of Emily's flight was just beginning. 26 minutes of fuel remaining. Emily's eyes swept across instruments that painted a grim picture of her Strike Eagle's condition. Oil pressure dropping on the surviving engine, hydraulic fluid leaking from severed lines, and electrical systems operating on emergency battery power that wouldn't last much longer. Each mile toward Shaw Air Force Base was purchased with careful energy management and constant vigilance against the mechanical failures that threatened to end her flight in catastrophic fashion. The damaged aircraft responded to control inputs like an injured animal, sluggish, unpredictable, and requiring constant attention to prevent departure from controlled flight. Emily had to relearn how to fly her own airplane, adapting to new limitations and behaviors that no simulator had ever replicated. The Strike Eagle that had taken off from Shaw was gone, replaced by a barely flyable collection of damaged systems held together by emergency procedures and pilot determination. Morrison's voice provided a lifeline through the emergency radio frequency, his aircraft shadowing her flight path from a safe distance while coordinating rescue efforts. 7-7, be advised that Shaw is preparing for emergency landing, crash crews are standing by, and the entire base is cleared for your approach. Emily acknowledged while calculating her fuel consumption against distance remaining. The mathematics were becoming increasingly unfavorable. Her damaged engine was burning fuel at rates higher than normal, and the emergency electrical systems were drawing power that further reduced efficiency. She was quite literally racing against physics, with time measured in minutes and survival dependent on systems that were failing incrementally. Backup, I need current weather at Shaw. Any wind or visibility issues could complicate the approach with degraded flight controls. Morrison's response carried information that provided both relief and additional challenge. 7-7, Shaw weather is clear with light winds but visibility is reduced due to morning fog developing along the coast. You'll be landing in marginal conditions even without aircraft damage. The fog represented another variable in an equation that was already stretched beyond normal safety margins. Emily would need to execute a precision approach using damaged flight controls, limited electrical power, and visual references that might be obscured by weather conditions. The cumulative effect of multiple challenges was testing her ability to manage complex problems simultaneously. 15 minutes from Shaw, Emily's remaining engine began showing signs of stress that indicated it wouldn't continue operating indefinitely. Oil temperature was rising above normal limits, and vibration levels suggested internal damage from debris ingestion during the left engine's explosion. She was flying on borrowed time, with mechanical reserves that were depleting as quickly as her fuel supply. Morrison, I need you to contact Shaw and verify that emergency equipment is prepared for potential hydraulic failure on landing. I'm losing pressure in the backup system, which means normal braking and steering may not be available. The request highlighted another dimension of Emily's emergency. Even reaching Shaw Air Force Base wouldn't guarantee survival if her aircraft couldn't be controlled during the landing sequence. She was simultaneously managing fuel conservation, engine monitoring, flight control degradation, and approach planning for an arrival that might occur with minimal aircraft functionality. Emily's emergency training had covered each of these challenges individually, but the combination of multiple critical failures was beyond the scope of normal instruction. She was essentially inventing solutions in real time, using her understanding of aircraft systems to devise procedures that weren't written in any manual. As she crossed into friendly airspace, Emily could see Morrison's F-15E in formation beside her, his presence providing both moral support and practical assistance for navigation and communication. His aircraft represented the normal world of functional systems and predictable performance that Emily's damaged Strike Eagle could no longer access. 7-7 Shaw approach control is ready to vector you directly to final approach, priority handling all the way to touchdown. Emily began her descent toward Shaw, managing power settings that had to balance fuel conservation against the need to maintain sufficient engine performance for approach and landing. Too little power would result in fuel exhaustion before reaching the runway. Too much power would stress her damaged engine beyond its ability to function. The South Carolina coastline appeared through the morning haze, with Shaw Air Force Base visible in the distance as a collection of runways and buildings that represented safety if she could successfully navigate the final challenges of approach and landing. Emily had flown this approach hundreds of times during training, but never with an aircraft that might become uncontrollable at any moment. Shaw Tower, Strike 7-7 declaring emergency final. Single engine, multiple system failures, fuel critical. Request immediate clearance for straight-in approach. The tower controller's response demonstrated the professionalism that made Shaw one of the premier pilot training bases in the Air Force. 7-7 Shaw Tower. You are cleared for emergency straight-in approach runway 19. All traffic is cleared from your approach path. Emergency equipment is standing by. Emily could see the crash trucks positioning themselves along the runway, their crews prepared for scenarios ranging from normal emergency landing to catastrophic aircraft breakup on touchdown. The sight was simultaneously reassuring and sobering. Professional rescuers were ready to help, but their presence acknowledged the very real possibility that her landing attempt might not succeed. 8 minutes of fuel remaining. Emily's engine parameters were now fluctuating in ways that suggested imminent failure was possible. Oil pressure had dropped to the minimum level for continued operation, and exhaust gas temperature was approaching limits that indicated internal damage was accelerating. She was flying an aircraft that might quit running at any moment. The approach to Shaw required crossing several miles of coastal marshland where emergency landing would be impossible due to soft terrain and water obstacles. Emily realized that her aircraft had to continue functioning for at least 5 more minutes to reach the runway environment where survival became possible even if the engine failed during landing. Morrison, if my engine quits during final approach, I want you to immediately contact search and rescue with my exact position. The ejection seat systems are still functional, but timing will be critical if I have to abandon the aircraft. The comment reflected Emily's pragmatic assessment of her situation. She was prepared to fly her damaged aircraft as far as possible, but she also understood the point at which continuing the flight would become impossible. Her months of studying emergency procedures had included detailed analysis of ejection envelope and survival probabilities that now had immediate relevance. Shaw Air Force Base grew larger in Emily's windscreen as she descended through the morning haze, her damaged Strike Eagle responding to control inputs with the unpredictability that characterized aircraft operating beyond their design limits. The familiar runway that had launched her on countless training sorties now represented the difference between survival and catastrophe. 7-7, you're 5 miles from touchdown. Fuel state and engine condition? Emily checked her instruments while adjusting her approach angle to compensate for reduced engine power. Shaw Tower, approximately 4 minutes fuel remaining. Engine operating at minimum parameters. I'm committed to this approach. No go-around capability. The words carried finality that eliminated options for second attempts or course corrections. Emily would land on this approach attempt or face consequences that ranged from dead-stick landing to aircraft abandonment. Her preparation, training, and natural flying ability would be tested in the next few minutes, under conditions that would determine whether she survived her first combat mission. The runway threshold grew larger in her windscreen, as Emily fought to maintain precise approach geometry with flight controls that required constant attention and compensation. Behind her lay the most challenging mission any pilot could attempt: penetrating hostile airspace, gathering critical intelligence, surviving multiple missile engagements, and managing catastrophic aircraft damage while navigating home on backup systems. Ahead lay the most dangerous landing attempt in Shaw Air Force Base history, requiring Emily to demonstrate that months of studying emergency procedures could translate into the practical skills needed to survive when everything went wrong simultaneously. 3 minutes of fuel, 2 miles from touchdown, one chance to get it right. 2 miles from Shaw's runway threshold, Emily's fuel gauge registered empty, though she knew a few precious minutes of fuel remained in the aircraft's reserve systems. Her damaged Strike Eagle descended through the morning coastal haze like a wounded bird, its single functioning engine operating beyond all safe parameters, while multiple warning lights painted her cockpit in urgent reds and ambers. 77, you're slightly left of centerline, came Morrison's steady voice through the emergency frequency. His F-15E maintained formation beside her, ready to observe and report the outcome of what would either be Shaw Air Force Base's most successful emergency landing or its most tragic aircraft loss. Emily made minute control adjustments, fighting the damaged flight systems that wanted to roll left due to asymmetric thrust from her dead engine. Every control input required careful calculation, too aggressive, and she might overstress the failing systems, too gentle, and she might not maintain the precise flight path needed for runway alignment. The runway grew larger in her windscreen, its familiar markings now representing the difference between survival and catastrophe. Emily could see the crash trucks positioned along the runway edges, their crews ready for scenarios that ranged from routine emergency landing to aircraft breakup on touchdown. Emergency personnel lined the taxiways, their presence both reassuring and ominous. Shaw Tower, 77 is 1 mile final. Engine parameters critical. Fuel exhausted, hydraulics failing. This will be a single attempt landing. The tower controller's response demonstrated the professionalism that made Shaw legendary among military pilots. 77, Shaw Tower. Winds calm, runway clear, emergency equipment standing by. You're cleared to land. Bring her home safely. Emily's training crystallized into pure focus as she entered the final phase of approach. The months of studying emergency procedures, the countless hours practicing backup system operations, the obsessive attention to aircraft systems that other pilots had dismissed as excessive, all of it converged into this moment where theoretical knowledge would either prove sufficient or reveal fatal limitations. At half a mile from touchdown, her remaining engine began surging irregularly, power fluctuations threatening to make the approach unstable. Emily compensated with precise throttle movements, using her understanding of engine systems to extract maximum performance from machinery that was disintegrating internally. The engine was dying, but she needed it to function for 90 more seconds. The runway threshold passed beneath her aircraft as Emily executed the critical transition from approach flight to landing configuration. Her damaged hydraulic systems meant normal landing procedures were impossible. Gear extension had been manual, flaps were inoperative, and braking would depend entirely on aerodynamic drag and whatever mechanical systems remained functional. Touchdown! Morrison's voice announced as Emily's Strike Eagle made contact with Shaw's runway. The impact harder than normal due to her aircraft's compromised condition, but within survivable parameters. The landing gear, deployed manually through emergency procedures, held the aircraft's weight despite the stress of single-engine approach and damaged systems. But touchdown was only the beginning of Emily's challenge. Without normal hydraulic pressure, her aircraft had no conventional braking capability, and the single operating engine was still producing thrust that wanted to accelerate the damaged Strike Eagle down the runway. Emily had to stop 40,000 pounds of aircraft using emergency procedures and aerodynamic techniques that she had studied extensively but never employed under such extreme conditions. She deployed the drag chute immediately after touchdown, feeling the aircraft slow as the parachute system created massive aerodynamic resistance. Simultaneously, she activated emergency braking systems that used backup hydraulic accumulators to provide limited stopping power. The combination began reducing her aircraft's speed, but she was still moving at dangerous velocity toward the end of Shaw's runway. Emily raised her aircraft's nose to increase aerodynamic drag while carefully managing power settings on her failing engine. Too much power would accelerate the aircraft beyond stopping capability. Too little power would cause engine failure that might be needed for taxi operations if she managed to stop successfully. The runway centerline markings flashed past as Emily's aircraft gradually decelerated, emergency braking systems and aerodynamic drag fighting against momentum that could carry her beyond the runway's safe stopping distance. She was essentially inventing landing procedures in real time, using her knowledge of aircraft systems to devise solutions that weren't written in any emergency manual. 7-7, you're decelerating normally, Morrison reported, his aircraft circling overhead to observe the landing sequence. Drag chute deployed. Emergency equipment tracking your position. Emily could see the runway end approaching, her aircraft still moving faster than normal taxi speed, but slow enough that she might achieve controlled stop before running out of pavement. The mathematics of deceleration were working in her favor, though barely she would stop, but with minimal margin for error. Her Strike Eagle finally came to rest 500 feet from the runway's end, its engines winding down as Emily completed shutdown procedures for systems that had functioned far beyond their design limits. The silence that followed engine shutdown was profound. No warning tones, no system failures, no immediate threats requiring pilot response. For the first time in hours, Emily could simply sit in her cockpit and process what she had accomplished. Emergency vehicles surrounded her aircraft within minutes, crash crews ready to assist with pilot extraction and aircraft recovery. But Emily was able to taxi clear of the runway under her own power, demonstrating that her damaged Strike Eagle retained enough functionality for normal ground operations, despite the trauma it had endured during combat and emergency landing. As she parked at the designated emergency recovery area, Emily realized she had completed a mission that tested every aspect of her preparation and exceeded every challenge her training had anticipated. She had penetrated hostile airspace, gathered critical intelligence, survived multiple combat engagements, managed catastrophic aircraft damage, and successfully executed emergency landing procedures that brought both pilot and aircraft home safely. The ground crew that met her aircraft was led by Staff Sergeant Santos, whose expression showed professional pride mixed with amazement at seeing her F-15E return from what should have been an impossible mission. "Lieutenant, I don't know how you kept this bird flying." The engine damage alone should have ended the flight, and the hydraulic failures would have prevented most pilots from maintaining control. Emily climbed down from her cockpit, her legs unsteady after hours of intense concentration and adrenaline management. The familiar sounds of Shaw Air Force Base, aircraft operations, ground equipment, and routine military activity seemed almost surreal after the electronic warfare environment and combat conditions she had experienced. Lieutenant Colonel Chen appeared among the emergency responders, her expression showing relief and professional satisfaction at seeing Emily return successfully from the most dangerous mission any pilot in their squadron had attempted. "Parker, intelligence preliminary review indicates your mission was completely successful. The information you gathered will be invaluable for NATO operations planning." But more important than mission success was personal validation that months of preparation had proven sufficient for the ultimate test of military aviation. Emily had transitioned from simulation expertise to combat effectiveness, proving that methodical study and systematic preparation could overcome even the most challenging operational conditions. "Ma'am," Emily replied, "the mission succeeded because the aircraft systems worked exactly as designed, even under extreme conditions. The backup procedures and emergency systems that I studied so extensively proved their worth when conventional capabilities failed." Chen smiled with the expression of a commander who had correctly identified exceptional potential in a pilot others had underestimated. "Parker, I think we can safely say you're no longer limited to training status. Your combat credentials have been definitively established." As Emily walked away from her damaged but triumphant Strike Eagle, she carried with her the knowledge that she had proven herself capable of executing the most demanding missions military aviation could require. The pilot who had been dismissed as Sim Queen by colleagues who confused simulation training with actual incompetence had demonstrated that thorough preparation and systematic knowledge could overcome challenges that defeated more naturally aggressive but less technically competent aviators. The morning sun burned through the coastal fog that had complicated her approach, revealing Shaw Air Force Base in all its purposeful activity. Emily Parker was no longer the pilot seeking validation. She was the pilot others would seek to emulate, having proved that when everything goes wrong simultaneously, survival depends not on bravado or instinct, but on knowledge, preparation, and the ability to think clearly under pressure. Her first combat mission was complete. Her career as a combat pilot had truly begun. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.